Now it's time for today's webinar on Coshh Awareness. I'm delighted to welcome Mark Nixon, who has worked for ARCO for 20 plus years and has been in the Professional Safety Services division since 2010. Mark's background is in engineering, and his interest in health and safety started following several serious incidents at a large iron foundry when completing his apprenticeship. So as a senior health and safety consultant at ARCO, Mark writes and delivers UK-wide training courses for some of the world's largest companies on a large range of topics, including COSHH Assessment, human behaviour, root cause analysis, and safety management. So Mark, we're really looking forward to your presentation today. Thank you for joining us. I'm going to pop my camera off and I'm going to jump back on at the end for the Q&A.
Can I just clarify, so do I have about half an hour, is that right from this point?
Yes, half an hour or longer if you need it. We can run through to around about 4 o'clock, leaving a little bit of time for questions towards the end.
No problem. Okay, great.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. So I'm going to begin screen sharing now. If anyone can let me know if there's an obvious issue with my connection, I would really appreciate that. So this is myself, Mark Nixon for ARCO Professional Safety Services. So this is what I'm going to cover today. So we're going to look at the very brief regulations. So I'm really not going to go into depth. I think a good overview of the regulations is pretty important. And we're going to look at the different types of substance and then how those organisms, how those substances, those materials can actually get into our body, so that the various ways that can happen. I think one of the things that we really need to clear up and clarify for people is the difference between material safety data sheets and COSHH assessments. So that's something that I always have kind of great interest looking at with clients. The workplace exposure limits, they can be quite confusing. So I want to give again a bit of a clarity around the workplace exposure limits. So COSHH, the most important thing about anything in health and safety is actually what we do about it, how we control those risks. And so we're going to look at, again, the different ways that we can actually control different kind of substances. And then moving on towards the end, health surveillance. People often get that mixed up with actually workplace monitoring rather than health surveillance. So again, we'll kind of clear up the confusion around that. So again, welcome questions and feedback at the end, or as we're going through, if any of those trickle through. Okay, so I want to split the COSHH regulations down into two kind of columns there. So mainly the employer's responsibilities, but also we need to consider the employee's responsibilities. So the first 5 regulations in the COSHH regs are kind of the preamble, just kind of setting up the kind of definitions and things like that. So it starts in earnest, regulation 6. That's all good safety principles should with risk assessment. So regulation 6, first of all, tells us we need to assess the risks to our employees and anybody else who might be affected by those from hazardous substances. So regulation is about risk assessment. So regulation 7 is very clear on this, and this is a real interesting one for me, I believe, which is a lot of companies don't tend to really try and prevent exposure sometimes. They do what they can to control exposure, and sometimes that's using the minimum method, which is dust masks. But the law's quite clear in things like manual handling, work at height, which is let's avoid doing this if we can. And so we really need to look, as a company, consider, can we prevent exposure to people? If not, then we're left with controlling that exposure in some way. So regulation 8 then looks at the control measures themselves. And so I was health and safety guy at the foundry for many years, and we had 3 fatalities, and we had 2 fatal accidents, but 1 fatal lung disease. So we had a person passed away from a work-related lung disease, and amongst that we had lots of kind of chronic dermatitis from prolonged mineral oil use. And so it's really important that actually, if we've got controls, we ensure those controls are actually being used by people. Well, that's critical. And then the employee's responsibility then is to play their part and to use what has been provided. If we've given them somewhere to put PPE, they need to use that and then to tell us if there's any problems. So we've got control measures. We might have local exhaust ventilation. As a foundry, we've got dozens and dozens of LEV, local exhaust ventilation, where we were kind of extracting, collecting, using big what we call knockout plants. And so it's really effective that those things are examined and tested regularly by law. There's a statute to regularly make sure that the flow rate that we're getting in our exhaust ventilation is actually what it's designed for. Because if it's not, then we've got a problem. And so it's really important that we actually keep an eye on the things, because they are the things that are protecting our staff becoming ill or affected in some way. So Regulation 10, there's often confusion between monitoring exposure and health surveillance. So monitoring exposure is what we do generally in the atmosphere. So as a foundry, the thing that ultimately killed one of our employees was the background silica. And so we've got this kind of very respirable, what we call particulate. And I'll explain the difference between some of that. And so if we'd have been monitoring that in the environment as we should have, maybe we might not have had a fatality on our hands. And so that's what we need to do to check the levels we've got. Very similar to noise, very similar to monitoring the noise background level. We need to monitor things like the exposure in the environment. So health surveillance then. So health surveillance is checking the people now. So monitoring exposure is checking the environment. Health surveillance is checking the people. And so, again, you can regularly check various things on people. We'll cover that right at the end. And then the employee's part in that is to be available for that health surveillance. And then moving towards the end, give people information. So I kind of break this down very simply. What information do we need to give people? Very simple. What are the hazards? What are the risks arising from those hazards? And what are the controls in place to prevent them from those hazards? So, I really break things down simply. Hazard risk controls. As long as people know what they are, then we've kind of done the basics, if you like. And so they need to know how to use the controls to prevent the risks from causing a problem. And then at the bottom there, and this is for the more serious kind of aspects of chemicals, when things go wrong, unfortunately, as they do from time to time. And so, so accident incidences and emergencies. And then if you're working with Group 4 biological agents, it's very unlikely you'll be coming here for the first time to learn about COSHH, because we're talking about things like Ebola. And so we've got some serious biological agents, people that work with those. So that's the regulations so I'm a very visual person. And so rather than reading reams of text, I like to kind of break it down into kind of colourful things that make it a little bit easier to understand. But let's not forget, these are kind of statute here in the UK, at least. And so over here, it's an offence not to comply with these. So it'll be interesting just to find out if there's any difference with regards to any of the other statutes. So the different substance forms then. So and again, you can look at these and categorize them in different ways, really. And so I'm just trying to split them down as best I can. So fundamentally, we've got dusts and particles. So these are the things that will get stopped by a dust mask. So your basic standard kind of mask. Okay, so we're not talking about the blue medical masks, which are generally there to protect people from our spit and our particles, rather than protect from things coming in, because the seal's just not generally good enough. And so we need proper respirators, and we'll look at that in just a moment. Nanoparticles is something that's, again, very topical at the moment, where we've created these very, very small engineered kind of almost kind of, what's the word I'm looking for, atomic size particles. And so again, if you're dealing with those, you'll be more aware than most people of those. So we've got chemicals in lots of different forms. So I've just kind of given the pictorials there that we've got gases, and then we've got the welding. We mentioned welding fume in one of those upcoming webinars that you're looking at. We've got welding fume. So welding fume, it gives off a number of things. It gives off ozone gas, it gives off potential vapors and also particles. And so that there's a big difference then between some of those things. And so gases and vapors will generally go straight through a dust mask, but they will get stopped by masks that are designed for that. So it's really important that we've actually got the right the respirators for the right hazards. And so the kind of trigger spray there is we've got a liquid, but then we've also got the creation of a mist. So a mist actually is still a particle, but it's a particle of water. So dust masks will actually stop particles of water, but once they then turn into vapors or gas and steam, then they'll go through a dust mask. And then we've got solids there. So we've got solids, liquids, gases, vapors, and then at the bottom there, we've got the biological aspects. So we've got viruses and bacteria. And so some of these things we will buy in. So the kind of picture at the top there is a bag of basically kind of ground down rock in essence. And so that's one form of substance. Then we've got the kind of the things at the bottom there, which are alive and hence biological, and that includes things like fungus as well, fungus. So bacteria and viruses are actually still particles. So they're actually still bits of stuff, if you like. And as such, they can actually be stopped by dust masks. So we've got the various different elements of how substances are. And then they've got the other side of it, which is the things that we don't buy. And so things like Legionnaire's disease is not something, and it can be overlooked sometimes because it's not something that you buy as a product. As a foundry, we got a lot of byproducts as a result of our processes. And so what we've got to do is, as well as the things that we get a material safety data sheet for when we buy it, what are the things that we are generating in our processes that are then hazardous to individuals? So how can all these organisms, how can all these particles, these gases, these vapors, these different, the different natures of things actually get into us? So our head is a source of many routes of exposure. So we've got ingestion, inhalation, we've got eyes, and also what's something very new to most people is something called ototoxic, which I'd never heard of until about 2 years ago, and not many people have. Things that are actually damaging to our ears. And so that's quite a new one, actually, that very few people have heard of. And then we've got the body, which in essence is the main kind of source of problems when we've got things that are getting into our breathing. So we'll kind of break these down one by one. So we've got our skin being the biggest organ on the body. And so these are various pictures that I've kind of shot around as I try to travel around. And so the skin is very good at getting things from out here and inside. And so if you used ibuprofen gel, that is designed to get into the skin. And so we've just got to really remember that our skin's very good at getting things in from out here and actually taking it through that barrier of the skin and getting it into the body. And so just need to be really aware of how susceptible the skin is. And we've got a kind of horrible dermatitis picture there. We've got a guy who came to chronic dermatitis from prolonged mineral oil exposure, and it's horrendous. He had to leave work because he'd become sensitized to the mineral oil and he could never come into contact with it again. And so his skin was what we call delaminating, where the top layer of skin was coming off the bottom surface. Horrendous. Ingestion. So generally people won't eat things or drink things on purpose. It's always by accident, pretty much. And a lot of the time it's really something that people haven't thought about. And so it's accidental ingestion where the person, so very often when in things like cleaning regimes where cleaners have decanted something into like a cup, and that cup has then been drunk on by accident by people like patients and actually cleaners themselves. And so generally ingestion is a lot less common, but it can be quite bad when it happens. So various pictures, I've done a lot in sharps and blood-borne viruses, and so that's an actual picture of mine from the sharps course. And so we've got these kind of sources of injection. Very often things will be injected on sharp objects, and so we have a substance on a sharp object that then gets injected through the skin, and again mainly by accident. So again, less common. So by far the most common is then going to be inhalation. So the picture on the left there is from, I was doing a course at a client, and I think it was manual handling. And so it was nothing to do with the hazardous substance, but I noticed that sign, and we'll come on to what that sign means a little bit earlier. And all the white powder you can see there on the outside of the bag is the stuff that should be inside the bag, and it is not being controlled at all, pretty much. And so we've got these lots of different ways that the body can get substances from outside into the body, and respiration is one of the key ways that it will get into our body. And so we've got two key filters. First of all, we've got the upper, the kind of primary filter, if you like, our nose. And so I'm going to sound awful here, but we get bogies, and that's nature trapping dust in our filter, our nose hairs. And then we've got the secondary filter, which is the upper respiratory tract. And so we then get phlegm, and that then coats particles. And so primary filter, secondary filter. Once particles get down to the lung, the deep lung, we've got a lot more problem. And so that's the idea of nature giving us these, the nose and the throat as the filters to stop these things. So if we've got people clearing the throat and kind of getting things in the nose, that's nature doing its job. Because once it gets further than that, then it starts to become really problematic. So we've got these different classes, and so fumes, people often mistake fumes for something like a gas or vapor. It's not. A fume is still a bit of stuff, like a particle. And so it's a kind of partially combusted particle, so it's not made it into kind of gas or vapor state. So gases and vapors are different. They will go through dust masks, but mists and dusts will generally get through in general, as will smoke as well, because of the particle size. So we've got these many different kind of aspects of breathable elements. And just I want to give people, I put this slide together a long time ago, and this is just to show you the different sizes of dust that can cause damage. And so the settled dust, if you've got dust on a surface, generally, if you put it under a microscope, it's going to be like the size of a car tire, which is big. In comparison, inhalable dust, so inhalable dust is dust you can inhale, but it will get trapped by your primary and secondary filters, nose and throat. However, respirable dust will get through those defenses, and as will smoke. And so it's actually the dust that you can't see very well that normally does the damage. The dust that you can see quite easily is normally the dust that does the damage. And so that's really important. So just because we can't see dust doesn't mean it's not there, and it doesn't mean it's doing the damage. Again, it's only when you put it in under a very strong light, and it's that dust that's hanging around in the air that's not falling that's actually going to do the harm. And so it's called respirable dust because it can get down into the lungs and be respirated. So we've got the different classes of respirators. So we've got the top three, which are all dust machines. They're all filtering out dust. So some of them look like they're more than that, but they aren't. These are still particle respirators. And just very quickly, P1 will make the air 4 times cleaner. A P2 mask will make the air 10 times cleaner inside the mask than the outside environment. And a P3 will make it 20 times cleaner. So what we don't want to do is, if we have done some air monitoring, we actually don't want to overprotect people. Just like with ear protection, we don't want to overprotect people. And so we need the right mask. People tend to default to P3 because it's the best, but you then kind of offer breathing resistance. So you need the right mask for the right job. And then the masks down there are therefore gases or vapors, and some of them will also stop particles if the filter's designed for that. And then we've got supplied air, which is when we're actually supplying fresh air, either from a compressed gas cylinder or from something like compressed air. So it's really important that we know what it is that we're dealing with, we know the kind of hazardous substance we've got, and that we actually have got the right bit of kit for that very specific form of substance. So this is my wife. So I'm a photographer, and so she's a long-suffering kind of subject of mine. She has lovely eyes, though, and so our eyes have got blood vessels. Extraordinary. If you kind of look in the mirror and do this, it's blood red for a reason there, because you've got blood vessels very close to the surface. So we have to be really careful with things, especially first aiders. You're a first aider, because the body will take whatever gets splashed into the eye and put it straight into the bloodstream. And so kind of youths have kind of been known to put alcohol and things like vodka in their eyes because it gets straight into the bloodstream. And so we have to be very careful with viruses and bacteria. And again, so if you're a first aider, you need to be really aware of your eyes and potential blood splashes, because the body will put it straight into the bloodstream very quickly. So there's a big high-risk area there from bacteria, and particularly viruses that are transmissible, from human to human. Warning: if you're squeamish, I'm about to show a pretty awful picture. So this is not actually from a chemical incident. This is from, I believe, an impact incident where a person had part of their eye damaged by flying debris, and then so this is a corneal patch repair where it's being put on the eye afterwards. And so again, our eyes are extraordinarily vulnerable, and so we really need to just be aware of what we're dealing with, and do we need to protect our eyes from chemicals and substances as well as flying particles. So the old symbols have changed. So the orange and black ones as we knew them have changed. And so they've gone to these new symbols. They've been around for a good few years now. It's called the globally harmonized system, where we've got these kind of exactly that globally harmonized symbols that all look the same now. Okay, so does what it says on the tin, this one. You've got the skull and crossbones there. And so that's either changed to the new colors, or we might have this other symbol, which is quite new. And this is the new one. This is the new boy, if you like, this symbol here, that still a lot of people don't know what it means. And so long story short, that new symbol, the one that looks like the kind of starfish on the chest, is to do with irreversible health effects generally. So you can see there, if you've got good eyesight, cancer, genetic damage, we're talking infertility, we're talking serious things. So the point here is, now the skull and crossbones, we're all quite familiar with that, but this new one, many people aren't. So real serious message here: if you see that symbol, you need to know more about what this substance does, and I'll give you a good example a little bit later. Okay, so the old orange cross on, the black cross on an orange background. So that was on the back of a bottle of bleach, for instance, quite often. And so that's now changed, but depending on the kind of substance it is, it will depend on the new symbol that it's got. And so bleach, for instance, will now have the corrosive symbol, the one with the kind of the test tubes in the hand. It might have gone to skull and crossbones. It might have kind of gone down to the exclamation mark, which means kind of irritant. Or it might have gone to that upper symbol again, where we've classed it as something that's basically going to do such as maybe like a sensitizer. And so again, it really is critical now to understand the information that's on the data sheet. I'll be mentioning the data sheets in just a moment. So know what the symbol is and know what it means. in regards to that substance that you've got. So corrosive, pretty easy one, this one. So again, bleach would have had the orange background and black cross. It's now got this one. And so pretty simple, this one. Does what it says on the tin, severe burns to eyes and skin generally. So flammable, pretty straightforward, that one. We've got explosive, so fireworks will have this on. So anything that can explode will have that explosive symbol on there. So if you're a sports person, this might look like a cricket bat. It represents a compressed gas cylinder, however. So not the best picture, I don't believe, for a compressed gas cylinder. So you might have compressed oxygen. So technically, the substance itself isn't hazardous, but it's the nature of the fact that it's compressed that makes it hazardous. So that's not particularly meaning a hazardous substance. It's more to do with the fact that it can explode as a cylinder. And then we've got the bottom one there, which it's the kind of flammable substance, but it's got an O, a letter O for oxidizing. So these are substances that can react violently, and so you've got that intensification of fire where something that kind of normally burns, an oxidizing substance can really ramp that up. So again, if you've got any oxidizing substances, you really need to look in detail at what they're about, what they don't like. So things like acids and alkalis, hate each other and they will react violently. So again, really need to do some homework on what that symbol means in relation to your product. And then we've got the environment. And so the biggest prosecution I'm aware of in the last few years is nobody was injured. And Tesco got £8 million. And they got an £8 million. It was £3 million for the explosion regulations breach and £5 million for the environmental breach. And so many things that are not hazardous to us, things like orange juice, beer, and when the fire brigade put a fire out, their fire water runoff, they're massively environmentally damaging, as is milk. And so there are a lot of things that we need to know about substances, and if they have that symbol on there, again, what is it harmful to and in what way? So I want to talk to you about the difference then between a risk assessment and a material safety data sheet. So on the left there, I've given you all the things that are in a material safety data sheet. So the substance there is a substance that this particular client of ours was using. So I asked him a question, do you know what that symbol means? And he didn't. I'm just going to stop sharing for a moment there. And so he really didn't know what that substance meant. And so I asked him, can you get the data sheet for that substance? And so we went along to his office, he got the data sheet and he found it very quickly. I said, okay, well, find the substance for me. He found the substance, he found that symbol, and I said, read what it means. And he read the description at the side of that symbol. And this is how it went. He kind of said, known respiratory sensitizer causes cancer. And then he looked at me funny and said, is that right? And I said, yeah, it must be right because they've told you that in the data sheet. And he looked around the environment that we got and he said, we've got a problem, haven't we? I said, yes, we've potentially got a problem here because the stuff on the outside of that bag is the stuff that was everywhere. And so what you've got here is you've got the 16 points in a material safety data sheet. So I'm not going to go through every single one of these, but basically what's in it. Again, the hazard identification, well, it says there, you've got that kind of symbol. Now, the reason you've never seen it is because under the old labeling, it never needed a hazard symbol because it's basically crushed up rock in a bag. That's what it is. It's a brown paper bag full of dust. And so under the orange and black labeling, it never had a symbol. Under this labeling, it's now got one. So things like asbestos, are very safe. You can eat it, you can drink it, but you just can't breathe it in. And it's the same with this. And so We've got all sorts of things here, again, including what we call physical chemical properties, stability and reactivity, toxicological information. So in the information, you've got everything you need to know in a data sheet. So what's a risk assessment then? Okay, so, well, very simple. They'd got a material safety data sheet. What they hadn't done was a risk assessment. So they thought they were doing the right thing by having this folder of data sheets. But what they hadn't done is assessed the risk of how they use it. So what do you do with it? How much do you use? How often? In what form do you consume this? How is it going to affect people? And then what do we need to do? So a COSHH assessment is what we do with this substance. So the data sheet is to tell us what it's like and what it does and what the risks and controls are. Our job is to figure out, okay, what do we do with it? And as such, how does that present a problem? So if you need to comply with the COSHH regulations, the first thing in Regulation 6 is you shall risk assess. It doesn't really mention data. Well, it doesn't mention data sheets, I don't think, in the statute, in the written law. The first thing it mentions in earnest is the risk assessment. And so it's so important. So the risk assessment is how we use it. And you might use the same substance in two different areas of a factory. It's the same data sheet, but you've got two COSHH assessments. Can you see that? It's the same data sheet, it's the same stuff, but you might use it in two different ways. You might use a lot over here and the guys might sweep it up. You might use a lot more over another factory, another area of the factory, but that's then ventilated. And so the risks are different. And so they're the fundamental differences. The data sheet follows the substance and it goes wherever that substance goes and to whoever buys it. The COSHH assessment is your assessment of what you do with it and the risks arising from that. So a little bit on workplace exposure limits then, because this can really confuse people. So I've got these from, so for anybody that's interested, again, many people haven't got this, but I'm quite sad. I'm a senior health and safety consultant. So I tend to find these things quite interesting. That's a guilty pleasure of mine, kind of leafing through EH40. It's not really, but it's interesting and you need to have it. So if you've got some substances, you kind of really need this. So this goes into detail on just about anything you can imagine. And again, so you can see there's just a huge amount of information. So let's break it down. Fundamentally, there are two things here, what we call long-term exposure limits and short-term exposure limits. So just picking sulfur dioxide there, just as or sulfuric acid in that particular, we've got a sulfuric acid there. No, I'll go with sulfur dioxide because it's got the information in. So sulfur dioxide, so what it's saying is if you use this all the time, then you'd look at the 8-hour time-weighted average, just 8 hours being an average shift. And so for sulfur dioxide, you've then got these kind of little acronyms. So ppm, parts per million. Parts per million. Let me just move my camera here because I've kind of got it looking straight at me where the information is. And we've then got mgm-3, which is milligrams per meters cubed. So generally, if it's in kind of if you're doing some kind of monitoring and testing, and you are using little what we call dosimeters to measure this stuff, and it's a substance that's got some kind of weight like a particle, then you'd use the milligrams per meter cubed. But gases and vapors, okay, you can't weigh them, and so what you do is you do a kind of a gas count, and you do parts per million. And so depending on the type of substance would depend on how you actually measure this. If you only use it for a short time, then you might actually look at the 15-minute, what's called the STEL, the short-term exposure limit. And so it depends on what you've got, and it depends on what you are doing and the form it's in as to which one of these you'd look at. Really important point now. How will you know how much is in your environment? Well, very simply, you won't. The only time you'll ever know what's in your environment is when you measure it, okay? When you measure it. And so if you were using, let's just say that we've got talc there, you've got some kind of respirable dust. Now, remember, inhalable means it can probably get trapped in the nose and the throat. Respirable means it's going to get through to your lungs. And that's why we've got that respirable dust. And so you're only allowed, 1 milligram in a meter cubed of that stuff before you need to start. So that's how much you're allowed in 8 hours. In 8 hours, that's how much you're allowed of that particular substance. And so if you were to get some dust monitoring equipment, you'd know, are you below that figure for 8 hours, or are you above that figure? If you're below the figure, okay, then you, in essence, can just keep an eye on it. You've done what's reasonably practicable. You might go and give people dust masks and things like that, but you're below the exposure. If you're above that limit, okay, then that's when you need to start taking action. If you're 4 times above that limit, you might be able to use a P1. 10 times above that limit, you might be able to use a P2, and 20 times above that limit, you might be able to use a P3. And that's the idea of those numbers on the masks. So really important, they're there. They probably need to be reserved probably more for your advanced COSHH course, but what they do is they help us figure out which of our substances have got an exposure limit, what are the limits, and then what you can do is measure your environment and find out where you are in comparison with those limits, and then figure out what you need to do. A couple of important terms then. So on some substances, you've got what are called a BMGV, so biological monitoring guidance value. As a foundry, we used to make iron and brass, and part of brass is lead, and lead is very dangerous. And so we used to have a doctor who came and did bloods. So he would measure the level of lead in your blood, and it was up to a certain limit. You had to have some time off work or be shifted onto another job. And so some substances they tell you how much you're allowed to have, and you have to have your biology monitored, your health monitored by a doctor, a little bit like radiation. So CAS simply means it's capable of causing genetic damage. So that might be unwanted cell growth, it might be cell mutation, cell damage, and so basically what cancer does, isn't it? And so it will tell you if that substance is a cancer-causing substance. As that substance was that I've been showing that picture of with that dust on the outside of the bag, the data sheet said this causes cancer. So SENIS, it tells you about occupational asthma, and then we've got SK simply meaning whether it's going to be a problem for the skin. So things like solvents and things will be a real problem for the skin. So for each one of those substances, on the end of there, I just not fitted it on my slide there. It tells you for each one of those whether there's anything specific about that substance you need to know in a bit more detail. So how can we control these things? The hierarchy of control. Okay, so the hierarchy of control in general, which we call ERIC PD, so eliminate, reduce, isolate, control. I'll explain that as we go through. So again, a close-up of that little substance on the bag there. So that's this little video. It's about 10 seconds long, and that's just a snapshot from it. So there it is, nice and clear. There's the symbol, and there you've got the dust falling out of the atmosphere and basically collecting on the bag. So the first thing is, can we get rid of this? Well, no. It was, they made a particular substance that was the main ingredient in that substance, in that product, so you couldn't eliminate it. But that's what we do with, so ARCO actually stands for Asbestos and Rubber Company. Most people don't know that. But yeah, Asbestos and Rubber Company. So you get rid of asbestos generally now, if you can. So can we substitute it? And that's what we've done with asbestos. We've substituted it. If you've got a nasty chemical, can you use a less harmful chemical? So drain cleaners, companies have very often substituted drain cleaners for less harmful ones. So can we isolate? Can we put the worker in a box away from the process, or can we actually put the process in a box away from the workers? In this case, in this picture, they've done neither. So engineering control. So this is where we bring in generally some kind of machine. And so they should have had extraction, ventilation around where they were handling these bags, but they didn't. And so can we engineer the problem out? So we then start coming down onto PPE. So in essence, excuse me, the ones above PPE are what we call hard controls. They don't rely on people. Because whenever you rely on people, if you're relying on somebody wearing a dust mask, then there's a problem there because people have a choice. They don't wear them properly, they forget, they don't put them on purpose. And so we've got training then. We need to train people. So what does this substance do to you? How can you avoid that? How can you put on this dust mask? So really quick one, seriously, on dust masks is, if you ever get a dust mask, don't pinch it. So don't pinch the top. Okay, you put your fingers on and you smooth it around. So never pinch. What you do is you create don't forget how small these particles are. Okay, they're just minute. They're bacteria-sized particles. And if you pinch a dust mask at the top, you create a Mersey tunnel size hole for that particle to go through. So press and smooth, then you've got a better seal. So it's little things like that in training that people actually don't know. Very simple little things that might make a big difference. And then procedures. So we've got this hierarchy of control, and again, the ones at the bottom are less effective than the ones at the top, hence this is a hierarchy. So the further up we can control a substance, the better. The further down we're controlling it, then it's more susceptible to human failure. And so health surveillance then, what is health surveillance? So very simple, it's how do we know our controls aren't working? And so let's check the controls. So let's say you've got a ventilator, you've got a very local exhaust ventilator where you're pulling a pipe down onto a welding operation. And so you're supposed to have so many cubic feet per minute going up that pipe. So how do you know that's still giving you that pull? How do you know that's still giving you so many cubic feet a minute? So we can check the controls, okay? And again, so that's strictly monitoring rather than health surveillance. We can check the environment, so we can do dust monitoring in the environment. As you can see on that picture there, no dust monitoring is needed. It's quite clearly, our controls are quite clearly inadequate. And then we can check the people. We check the people, in particular, their skin. So have they got the first signs of dermatitis? So the redness, the kind of itching, the kind of cracking, potential bleeding. If it's got to bleeding, it's gone too far. The lungs, so what we call spirometric testing, where you're testing how much someone can breathe, and then you check that over time, and you can see if their lung function capacity is reducing. If we'd have done that with our Arab colleague who passed away at the foundry I worked at, we might have known he'd got an issue, but we were too late again. So let's get there nice and early. And then bloods, again, that's for more of the serious substances with some of those BMGVs, those biological monitoring guidance values. You might have to check people's blood to actually see if they're becoming exposed to the substances. And so there's things we can do before someone gets ill, and there's things that we can do kind of to pick things up nice and early, and that's generally what health surveillance does. It tries to pick things up nice and early. So just to summarize then, and so that's just the kind of the picture there is the kind of zoomed out view of that substance there, that their data sheet in the office, in the folder, told them was a sensitizer, which means it's going to, once the body's had enough of it, you will have a massive reaction to it and you won't be able to come into contact with it again, ever again. And so it told them that, and it also told them it causes cancer. My question is, does it look well controlled? The answer is no, isn't it? It doesn't at all. And so please use my experience here. Don't wait for someone to develop a condition. As a foundry, we unfortunately left things too long, and we were mopping up the consequences. Think worst case scenario. Just ask yourself then, with this product, what could happen? What does it tell us about this substance? And then just imagine yourself dealing with a claim, imagine yourself dealing with the Health and Safety Authority and saying, okay, so what would we need to be able to prove that we've done to basically get out of this, to not be prosecuted, and to walk away, you know, without a prosecution, and to not be paying claims out because we've done the right thing. And so it really does start with COSHH assessment. It really does start with getting the data sheets and then doing a COSHH assessment based upon what you do with that substance. So my kind of catch-all phrase for this is, does your assessment, when you've done it, does it look like your job? And so I should be able to come along, read your COSHH assessment without knowing what it's about, and look around your work environment and have a pretty good guess what it's talking about, and all the stages that contains. And then pass it to other people and say, does this COSHH assessment seem right? Okay, so just want to thank you for the kind of allowing me to speak to you. I've packed quite a lot in there, so I was asked to kind of cover certain things and kind of pack it in there, which I've done. So really happy to kind of field people's questions then, if anybody's got any questions.
Mark, can I jump in just to say thank you so much for that really interesting presentation. You've really broken that down for us, and some really helpful visual depictions within the slides as well, which are great. And I loved what you were saying about the risk assessment and the safety data sheets. I thought that was really interesting and really well explained. I see we have got a first question in there in the Q&A box, so I'll maybe just jump to that first of all, if that's okay. So we have a question there, which is, when doing a COSHH assessment, should we include both risk phrases and hazard phrases now, or just the new hazard phrases?
Okay, so yeah, so generally you've got the hazard phrases in the new literature. Thank you, William, for that. So yeah, so we've got the hazard phrases, and then we've got I think the safety phrases. And what I might do is I might just jump into a quick data sheet if I can.
Sure.
Just jump into a data sheet and just see if I can get a new one up for you, which has got some of the new information. So let me just have a look in here. So data sheet examples. Okay. Okay, so I just need to go into another folder. So just while I do this, I'm just going to talk. So as much information as you've got, use that information. What I would say is, don't try and pack too much information in. Don't just duplicate the data sheet for the sake of it. In fact, actually, there's something that we really need to kind of watch out for on that. What we don't want to do is just duplicate the data sheet, because that's just a waste of time. Fundamentally, our COSHH assessment should be, again, a good assessment of what we're doing, a good assessment of what we're doing, and then again, our aspects. But people should be able to look at the COSHH assessment and understand it, So just getting one of the data sheets up in the background here. So I'll just try and, that's actually a client version of one. So this is what people do. They tend to okay, just bear me a second. There we go. I'm just going to screen share then.
Sure.
So you can see this. So this is diesel, something not many people know. It's a class 1 carcinogen, first of all. And so this is diesel. And so you can see the different symbols there. So you've got the symbol that's telling you, well, you can see there it's got the aspiration hazard. So aspiration, which I actually didn't cover, is when it gets into your airways. And so some things, so like things, petroleum-based products, petrol, things like that, can kill us just by getting into your airways. And so we've got the carcinogenicity, so just basically how cancerous it is. And then you've got what's called, again, you'll probably find this out on your more advanced course, what we call specific target organs. And so what we actually now know is, in fact, it's not mentioned on there, is so we've got blood, the thymus and the liver, but we also know it causes bladder cancer. People that work a lot around vehicles, so if anybody's on this call who works around diesel exhaust, again, people in gatehouses, bus drivers, working around yards, there's a link with bladder cancer and diesel now. So again, well worth being aware of. And so what you've got here is you've got some of the hazard phrases. You've got some of the hazard phrases. Let me just kind of, give me a second. There we go. So you've got some of the hazard phrases, some of the H phrases. I'll just zoom in there, make it a bit easier for you. It's not the easiest document to try and manage it, to kind of move around, so I'll leave it at that. So you've got, H, hazard phrase, suspected of causing cancer. It also tells you, you've got the environmental side there as well. Just trying to move up, there we go. Fatal if swallowed, skin irritation. It's pretty nasty. And then you've got the precautionary statement. So in general, it really is, it depends on the data sheet as to what information it gives you. Some information still give you the risk phrases, but even though we've got this globally harmonized system, the data sheets are a little bit here or there. So some give you loads, some just give you the basics, but what you've got there is the hazards and the precautions. So you can see the P statements further down. So we've got there, keep away, avoid breathing, wear face protection, if swallowed. And so quite a bit of information there. And then just while we're on this, that then shows you, let me just zoom out a little bit. You also see so yeah, we've also got there the work, the wells, the exposure limits. So that's some of the wells, some of the workplace exposure limits in action there. So again, that's giving you the information on the workplace exposure limits. And again, that one there, there's naphthalene, skin. So it's particularly bad for getting through the skin. Okay. So as much information is relevant that you can glean. Again, don't just carbon copy everything into the risk assessment. For me, I want to be able to look at a risk assessment and not wade through 10 pages. What I always advise is on the front page, make it really obvious. This is how it's going to cause you harm, and this is what you need to do. And so again, if it's going to cause you breathing harm and skin damage, I want on the front of there, this is the mask to wear, and these are the gloves to wear. So just make it really clear. If people want to wade further back, fair enough, but make it nice and clear on the front, how it's going to cause you harm and what the people can do about it.
That's really helpful. Thank you very much for that. We've had a couple of other comments and questions in. A few thanks there for your presentation. There's also someone asking if the presentation will be emailed. It'll certainly, the recording certainly is available.
Actually, could I answer that one?
Yeah, of course.
And in relation to the presentation, the webinar is being recorded, and that will go up on our website. It usually takes me a couple of days to get the thing uploaded, but below the presentation, you'll see the recording of the webinar. You'll see a copy of Mark's presentation, so it'll be freely available there. If the person that asked the question, and I've seen they're anonymous, if they wanted to send me an email in, I'll make sure also that I'll send one, and just send that email to info@nisg.org.uk. And the other one there, I see we have someone on the call that is looking to catch up with Mark. I suppose sometime when we're actually allowed to physically see each other. Again, send me an email in, and I'll sort of hook the two of you up. I'm sure there's no issues there. Ashley, thanks a lot.
I'm a friendly guy, so.
Ernie, thank you very much. That's super. We have a further question. Hi, what's the best approach for completing COSHH assessments for welding fumes in a vehicle workshop? Would it be best to complete a separate assessment for each welding consumable used?
Okay, good question. So I always answer this question very similar, really. Which is most helpful for you. If they used, and now I'm not an expert on welding. I think that's the first. I did it at college when as an engineer, so I remember doing welding, and it wasn't my strong point. But I'm a machinist. That's what I did. So if depending on the kind of welding, so this is the key thing. There's lots of kind of different kinds of welding, and so if it's more helpful for you to combine, then I would suggest doing that. However, if it's quite clear, now it might be one for the kind of more advanced COSHH one, as to whether they want to answer the question, whether they would recommend doing it for each. So I wonder if the person that's left that can either kind of, I don't know if they can come on here or just provide a little bit more information on what it is, the different consumables, and so that might allow me to kind of answer that question. So, but at the end of the day, it's a little bit like if you are producing, if you're adding a lot of chemicals in to if you're mixing chemicals, there's a byproduct of that, okay? And the byproducts, the hazards of the byproduct can be worse than the actual constituent parts to begin with. And so you would actually do a COSHH assessment based upon the whole process. So the COSHH assessment would be, okay, we get these chemicals, we mix them together. This creates a kind of secondary chemical, and actually the nature of this chemical we've produced is actually worse. And so you kind of consider that. So the COSHH assessment covers everything from kind of beginning to end. And so it covers how you're going to kind of mix it, how you're going to dispose of this, how are you going to apply it. And so yeah, the kind of, in answer to the welding question, I'd be tempted to do it for the whole process, unless for some reason that doesn't seem to be useful, and it seems to make more sense to do it by the actual constituent elements. So that's fair down to that question. I apologize if it's not that clear and that's slightly ambiguous. And again, I don't know if person's put any information in there. Okay.
I don't see anything else, but certainly maybe if the person who's asked that question does want any further clarification, they could pop another question in there, or actually use the raise hand function, and that means that Ernie could unmute them just if they wish to do so.
Yeah.
I'm just having a look. We've had another question. What is the best process to ensure you keep track of all the latest MSDS? Could have 100 or hundreds of chemicals, i.e. online systems, it says.
Yeah.
Good question.
Yeah, so our when I tried to get that diesel data sheet up there for the first time, I actually accidentally got one of the client's versions of this, and so the reason for that is because they have systems. So they have systems where these are all kind of logged on there. So I would definitely recommend online systems. Also, so online, online, however you want to put it, but some kind of system for people to kind of COSHH assess as well. And so if you've got, let's say, a large organization and different sites, but you've got cleaners at lots of different sites, but they're all using the same substance, they're all doing the same job, albeit at different sites. What you can do is you can create a COSHH assessment, a generic one. Okay. Now, what you don't want to do is everyone just gets that generic one and goes, oh yeah, that'll do. We've got this COSHH assessment now. What you need to do is take that COSHH assessment and ask yourself, yeah, is this the same stuff? Is this how we use it? And if you look down there and think, yeah, this is the way we use it, then yes, you can use those kind of systems. And so, yeah, definitely, most companies now have systems online. I don't know them, so I can't. And again, it's not even. I'm not trying to sell you anything. I can't sell you anything because I don't know those systems. Just because in my job, I have no need for them. Would literally Google, something like COSHH datasheet online system, and I'm sure many companies will want to try and sell you a system, or they might systems. Or the other thing is has anybody on this call actually got one?
Yes.
Anybody on this call got one that you can share and say, yeah, this is what we use. We find it great. So yeah, that's what I would recommend. It definitely is. There's nothing wrong with paper, but I think nowadays it can actually help you. It can definitely make it faster. Definitely.
Yeah. That's excellent, thank you. We've had a follow-up comment there in relation to the welding consumables, which I think is in relation to the previous question. So maybe just to go back to that, the welding consumables are carbon steel, fine grain steel, and MIG, a welding wire. Yep. If that helps at all for the previous question.
Okay. Right. So I'd be looking at getting both the data sheets for that. Looking if there is, so I've never seen a data sheet for a welding rod, but they'll have them. And so again, like the diesel, it will tell you, these are the kind of risks arising from this. And then you've got the MIG welding by. What I would recommend, so kind of just down there is David. What I would recommend there, if David's your name, is looking online again to see if anybody else out there. I mean, just think about how many welding companies there are out there, people doing this already. And the other thing is, approach the manufacturers and actually say, look, this is great, but we actually combine it with MIG. Have you actually got anything that as a result of these two things being combined, these are the risks arising from the carbon steel and the MIG welding wire being combined. I don't think there'll be any additional risks. I think it will be one will more than likely be more harmful than the other. Okay, and so you can almost say, basically, look at the kind of, let's say the MIG was worse than the carbon steel. You could say, well, let's just kind of do worst case scenario again and say, okay, well, as long as we're protecting from welding wire, or again, I would go to the manufacturers and say, what are the kind of things that most companies who you supply these to, have you got any example COSHH sheets from those companies there? But yeah, I mean, fundamentally, the controls for welding fume are pretty generic. And so it really is generally powered respirators, so what we call positive pressure, forced air respirators now. So rather than you breathing in through a filter, it's pressing air into the mask, which is then things can't get in because it's forcing air out. And so things can't actually get in. Combined with kind of local pull down kind of fume extractors, or if they're not, more kind of general hoods for welding. So it's generally a combination of kind of powered air respirators and local exhaust ventilation. So in which case, again, there shouldn't really be any exposure. But again, there's information published from the HSE nowadays on welding fume and cancer. It's really something we've got to take. So what I would recommend is looking at the HSE and looking at the information they've provided on welding fume and cancer, because I believe it's quite topical.
Okay. Thank you very much for that. I see we have actually had a further comment there, just saying that someone there has invested in a web-based COSHH management system, well worth looking at for consistency, was the comment from one of our attendees.
Yeah.
I think that's all of the questions that we've had in the box, unless anyone has any final questions that they want to put in there. And Ernie, you'll correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think we have any raised hands for asking questions directly. I've been keeping an eye on that side of things as well. So if I've missed anything, let me know.
I said there's none come in, but if someone wants to ask a question verbally, just hit the raise hand function and we'll proceed from there.
Sure, we'll just give that a wee minute or two to see if anybody does have anything else that they'd like to ask.
So just whilst people do that, I've seen it at its worst. Again, we had a fatality. We had the 2 fatal accidents and a fatal lung disease fatality. And the lung disease was worse simply because the fatal accidents were over in seconds.
Mm-hmm.
The lung disease is an awful reduction of lung function, where the person just is able to breathe less and less every day, just like, you know, lung cancer from smoking. And so it's a no way to go is good, but, you know, it's a bad way to go because it's painful and it's drawn out. And so the key thing really is we need to prevent this first of all. We need to know about the stuff that we are exposing people to. We need to know the levels we've got. Again, that's from the kind of the kind of dust monitoring. And then we need to look at, again, how are we against the workplace exposure limit? What do we need to do? And then put those controls in place. And then we need to know that they're working and that they're being used. So if people are given dust masks, that they're wearing them correctly. And so we do face fit testing. Okay, we do face fit testing to make sure that they actually fit. And then we monitor their health on a regular basis. So you know, for me, they're just the real key, the key steps. Again, you don't want to be looking at a claim because, you know, you're talking a lot of money, bad publicity, and yeah, so it's the accidents are things that we tend to. So just in terms, let me put it in context for you. In the UK, I think around about at the minute there's about 120 fatalities. So it was about 140 pre-COVID, but let's say 140 fatalities, workplace accidents. Okay, so 140 fatal accidents. Occupational disease, 14,000 fatalities.
Yeah,
it's 100 times worse. So the health part of health and safety is responsible for 100 times more fatalities than the safety bit is, and we forget that. And so once you hear it like that, you suddenly get this context of. And so many companies focus so much on safety and not much on health, but it kills 100 times more people.
yeah.
And 10,000 of those are occupational lung disease. Half of those 10,000 are still asbestos. So please take asbestos seriously. It's the reason we've not mentioned asbestos today is so asbestos and lead have their own regulations. So if you're dealing with asbestos or lead, you're looking at separate regulations. And then again, just in the absence of any kind of hands going up, Legionnaire's disease, that comes under COSHH, and so you need L8. So you need L8. That's the approved code of practice for Legionnaire's disease.
Okay. Thank you so much for the benefit of your experience here today, you know, and for emphasising those key areas that that employers and organisations need to look at in terms of compliance with COSHH. I don't think there's anything else there that I have seen come in. Ernie, you can jump in and let me know if I've missed anything.
No, I don't think you missed anything at all, actually.
Okay,
just for the sake of the recording.
Yeah.
Just for the sake of the recording. And so if you do any occupational kind of monitoring, then we need to keep COSHH records for 40 years. Because if someone's going to have an accident, they're going to do it then and there. And if somebody's going to have, so asbestos might not show up for between 10 and asbestosis, a lung problem with regards to asbestos, might not show up for 40 years. It might not cause that person a problem for that long. It can be decades. And so we have to keep COSHH records for at least 40 years. So whatever you've done, keep those records. Okay, so I'll just mention that just for the completeness of the recording at the end there.
Absolutely, thank you so much, and thank you for a great presentation. So interesting, and we're really grateful that you were able to come along and talk to us today. So thank you very much for that.
You're welcome.
Just a couple of final points really from me for everyone. If you have colleagues that you think would benefit from watching this webinar, we hope that you will be able to share that with them. As we said earlier, it will be uploaded onto our website in a few days, and once it's uploaded, we'll also circulate the link as well, so that you can share that within your organisation as well. To any non-members today, thanks again for joining us. Do let us know if you have any questions about joining up, and thanks again for coming. Another little plug for the John Gordon Award. Please do think about having a look at our website and whether or not you might have anyone that you could nominate for their contribution to health and safety over the last 12 months. And that brings everything to a close for us today. So thank you, everyone. Take care, and thanks very much for attending.
Thanks,
All the
guys.
best. Thanks, Mark. Bye-bye.